Democrat.com, the Republican candidate for governor.
Have sexual relations.
I realize that this is something he isn't
We're not going to be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Hey, we're back. Backfire's back again this morning. Welcome.
With a big happy birthday to Steve Doughball Hickson.
All right. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Now, that's over with.
Well, on the radio, you don't look any older than you did last year.
That's right. You don't look older on the radio, do you?
No.
Hey, we got John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey live in the studio this morning.
Franklin's got his bow tie on today.
He's getting kind of bow tie-ish here lately.
Right.
I've seen him wear it 2 or 3 times. It must be about time.
All right, so History Channel's doing a thing on the history of the automobile. Henry Ford hires this bruiser, basically bodyguard henchman back in the day, and he always wore bow ties because he said that that way he didn't have something someone could grab and strangle him by. Is that your reason for wearing bow ties?
Absolutely.
Franklin?
Yeah, thanks for telling everybody, John.
Okay.
He's going to have to get him a pair of white bucks to go with his bow ties.
Well, you can't make the transition all at once.
Now let me brag on Franklin. I've got a closet full of a handful at least of nice bow ties that I've never worn. I buy them and I go, I'm going to wear this, and then I go in and I look at them and I go, I can't do it. So he's braver than I am. You have to kind of be a little bit aggressively brave to wear a bow tie.
Or
I mean that in a good way. I literally have them hanging in the closet for 25 years and have never brought up the courage to wear them. Right.
Wow.
Anyway, Franklin, you look real spiffy this morning.
Spiffy. I'm really not sure how to take that, but okay.
We came in the studio this morning bright and early, and I thought we were getting gassed. And we had some natural gas odors in here pretty strongly. So
what have you been eating?
It wasn't me. But we've now got a fan in here so we can get the odors out. I think it's coming from our favorite restaurant in town, the Bald-Headed Bistro. They're checking it out for us right now. I don't really know where to start in this week's news, but I guess we could talk about, they got a definition of what a forensic audit was, and I think they voted not to do anything about the forensic audit, and they're going to wait and see what happens. So I think that's a wise move on their part. What do you think? Now, who do you think I'm talking about?
Well, I guess the sheriff's department.
No, they're talking about the whole county. The whole county. The forensic audit has to happen for the whole county. It doesn't happen for one department.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not. It can't be specific.
Why did they vote not to? Is it too expensive, or?
Well, let's see. There's several opinions on why they should wait and see what happens with the court cases coming up. There's really nothing they can find that's missing to offer having a forensic audit issued. Some think it's a witch hunt. What? Any other opinions here?
Well, I hate to put it on a person that I like, but I guess I haven't really seen any comments from Mylan Blake, who's the chairman of the budget committee, I think.
Finance.
And I'd like to know what he says about it. Is there any evidence or any accounting discrepancies that they haven't been able to otherwise answer? Okay. If they haven't, then I think it's a reasonable thing to investigate it further. If he's satisfied, I think he does a reasonably good job on that. And even though he is in the other party, I've been pretty pleased with the work that he's doing there. And so I would say I would follow his lead, but I really haven't seen any commentary from him yet.
Of course, it's not like Franklin has an elected Democrat to favor over the other party in Bradley County.
Well, I'm just pointing out when credit's due, I'll give credit.
Okay.
I gave credit to Mike Smith last week. He was here.
Mike does a great job.
He
I'm not
does.
going to give credit to every one of our.
I don't know.
Republican
Is there anything else we
officials.
need Mike Smith to do for us in Cleveland?
Well, I mean, we discussed there are savings for being able to combine different services. The problem is you can't get the political will in the city or the county to streamline government. Government always grows, and no matter what level it's on. The bigger the government, the bigger the growth, and the more egregious the overdoing becomes. But you have government growth on all levels. We talked about this, that there have been efforts to combine departments, and the city appoints the department in question to the study committee, and the county appoints the department in question to the study committee. And amazingly, the study committee comes back and goes, "Oh, we don't find any savings." Well, you should have outside people do these studies, and I personally think it should be outside volunteer. We never used to hire consultants and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on this stuff. We had local business people who volunteered to try and help their community. No, we didn't listen to them either. That's true.
And I'd say there's still a lot of local volunteers out there.
No, I think the people would volunteer, but my point is we've gotten to now they'll go, well, we don't want to do a study because it'll cost $40,000. Well, maybe you don't need an expert out of New York City to help you figure out how to run Cleveland, Tennessee better.
North Korea says it won't fire missiles at Guam after all.
Yay.
Well, I don't think you can get away from the fact that for probably 2 or 3 decades now, we've kind of tried a different approach where we were a little softer. I think that the combination between what Trump said and really apparently much more effective was what Mattis and the Joint Chiefs said in New York Times, I believe it was, or Wall Street Journal, story, that apparently bothered the North Koreans. And so I think that the strong rhetoric worked. Now, what it's going to produce in the long run, now we have to get in there and see what we can work out.
Well, I agree. What's your opinion, Franklin?
Well, I saw several members of the intelligence community speak over the weekend, and they offered the opinions that, putting all the rhetoric aside, that what North Korea had been doing, although we disagree with it, at least had a rational strategy under it. And the strategy was simply their belief that if they had weapons, that they wouldn't be attacked. And that they would never commit suicide. And actually doing something with any of those weapons would have been suicide. And that, at least to that extent, they felt that the threat from North Korea was being somewhat overstated because their goal was not to be offensive, but to ensure their defense. Whether that's true or false, I don't know, but it's at least a plausible theory. But those were several members who were in the National Security Agency who were given those statements, including Mike Pompeo at the CIA.
I don't disagree, but the problem is you have to follow that a little further out. The history of North Korea is they do these provocative acts. They provoke us mostly, but they provoke the region, they provoke the world, and then they use the cessation of those acts as a reason to get concessions out of the West. I think in this particular case, they overshot their objective, and I think the Trump administration came back very hard to some criticism from people on the left and the right, but it turns out that reaction has actually done something. Now, apparently, the Trump administration has also been very active quietly with China behind the scenes. The fact that China and Russia didn't veto the new sanctions against North Korea was a huge win for the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And in fact, what you saw just this week was the North Koreans pulled their diplomats, pulled their ambassadors, not from America. They pulled them from China and Russia and several of the other countries in that region. So I don't think there's any way to not view this as a success for the Trump foreign policy team. Now, again, having said that, now we have to pursue it and see if we can actually do something about reducing their capabilities.
Well, and putting pressure on China to continue the pressure is where they're going next, I think, right?
Well, the point is you want China to feel that it's in their best interest that this thing kind of settle down. And you know, there was a lot of hype over the weekend too. When Trump first made some of the statements he made, you had people start talking about how many millions of people would be killed in Seoul, South Korea. Well, for example, there's about 3 or 4 million people in Seoul. Do you know how many people they can bomb shelter in Seoul?
No, I mean,
22 million people.
No.
They have bomb shelter capability of that. Now, the media did some things like the North Koreans have a gun that'll reach the southern regions of Seoul. So that's why they were able to say, oh, they're going to obliterate Seoul. Well, they only have a few guns that can do that. Most of their guns can barely reach the northern outskirts of Seoul. So the idea that they were going to obliterate Seoul was actually an overhype by the people reacting negatively to what President Trump had said. On top of the fact that they actually bombarded an island off the coast that the South Koreans have a base on. About 20% of their rockets and artillery shells actually hit the island. The South Koreans had a glitch in their software and weren't able to respond for 18 minutes. So for 18 minutes, they had a complete shooting gallery, and they were only able to hit it 20% of the time. And of the 20%, about half of those were duds. So there was overhype going on both sides, but there's no way to avoid the fact that this is a success for the Trump administration.
Your opinion, Franklin, anything? Was it a success?
Well, I don't think it's over yet.
No, I agree.
I think that it was a step in the right direction for them to get back to the diplomacy side. I mean, they sent a message, you know, what is clearly a change in American policy. They sent a message directly to them that if they backed down, that they would engage in direct negotiations with them, which we have not done for
Tillerson
20
did
years.
say that.
So we will see.
But Mattis also said, if you fire at Guam, it's game on. And
Sure.
I think this was the first time you've had an administration in a long time actually say, look, we will use these weapons.
That's not really a surprise. Guam is American territory.
But we had gotten to that point after 3 decades of basically backing down, and I think they never felt like it was a serious threat from any of the past 3, Republican and Democrat.
Okay, maybe
and
so.
I think they thought this was a serious threat from the Trump administration.
Maybe so.
Well, I think it worked then, didn't it, John?
Now, Franklin's right. There's a lot more work to do. But I think,
What do you think about...
but now keep in mind the Moab bomb and the missile attack in Iraq and Iran, that had an effect here too. They've seen an administration that's been willing to actually do something and to draw a red line and to stick to the red line.
What do you think about... we usually have, this time of year, we have some shared forces, shared air things with South Korea.
It's coming up this week.
And it comes up this week. Should I think he was trying to excuse me. He was trying to influence us not to do that.
When it's still tricky.
I think in light of that, although it will not be announced, what you'll see is those shared exercises. Thank you, John. Those exercises will go on, but I would predict that they're 20 or 30 miles farther south than they would have been otherwise, which is the smart, wise, diplomatic thing.
Do you think
to do.
they'll go on?
I think they have to go on.
They will go on, but it'll be in a different location than they would have done had the rhetoric not toned down some.
He's probably right about that, because the North Koreans in their statement made that the kind of catch, unless we're provoked. So on the one hand, we have to do it. We can't appear to pull back from it, but we also want to make sure we don't give them a reason.
You'll probably get some negative statement from North Korea, but it'll just be a statement,
right,
and that's to be expected.
All right, let's talk about the protesting that went on over North Carolina, over the
Virginia,
I'm sorry, over the
well, Durham, they tore a statue down too.
Right. Well, that's kind of what I'm going. I mean, I want to end up there, but you know.
Well, let me start with something.
Go ahead.
The protester, well, and in all fairness, you have to say there were two sides protesting in Charlottesville, but the original protesters have nothing to do with the Republican Party. They have nothing to do with the conservative movement. Fascism is anti-conservative, it's anti-freedom, and quite frankly, it's anti-Christian. It's a horrible ideology, and there is no defending it whatsoever, outside of the fact that we do have a First Amendment protection of unpleasant hate speech. It is protected, in my opinion. But having said that, this is what identity politics looks like. We've been moving towards this for years. When you allow people to segregate out into their national or ethnic identity, when you play to that, when you agitate that, this is where it ends up. And so we've been moving towards this for a long time. And in my opinion, we just talked about North Korea. I think this is probably the greatest threat to our continued place in the world that we've seen. So I completely condemn them, but we ought to be able to have a rational discussion of identity politics on all sides, because it's bad for us no matter who the identity is.
When you're talking about identity politics, tell me exactly what you're talking about.
We're not Americans. We're blacks, or we're whites, or we're Hispanics, or we're union, or that's identity politics. Instead of saying we're Americans and you have this interest and he has that interest, we say you're this, you're that, you're the other. And it pits people against each other.
Where do you think that came from?
Well, here's the problem. I personally think it came more from the left, but that doesn't excuse the fact that we've got plenty of people playing it on the right as well. And we've got to be, Franklin and I, people hear us yelling and hollering and we're, seem very upset. We walk out that door and we discuss mutual concerns when we walk out the door. We don't agree all the time about things, and on this show it gets kind of heated. But I have no ill will towards him. I hope he has no ill will towards me. And we walk out the door and we're able to discuss things that we can agree on. That's where we used to be as a nation, and we've lost that.
Franklin?
Perhaps there is a time to have the discussion that John just talked about. This weekend is not that time. Because what happens in that is you end up making some sort of moral equivalency, which is wrong.
Well, let me ask you a question, Franklin. Is there not a moral equivalency between how evil white supremacy theology is and black supremacy theology?
Well,
is there any difference?
First of all, while I may disagree with some of the methods of the Black Lives Matter movement, I have never heard any of them argue for black supremacy.
Well, let me read it to you then. The attacker that shot the 4 or 5 officers in Dallas was a black nationalist. And
okay.
He made exactly the
that
mirror
was an individual,
image.
Though, John. That was
no,
not a
he
group.
Actually was tied to the Black Lives Matter group. There was another shooter who was actually tied to the Huey Newton Gun Club, both of which were black nationalists who actually killed people. Now, I'm not, my point is, Franklin, the problem here is hatred and racism, whether it's black racism or white racism, and the fact that you will look at this and say, we can't discuss racism in general. I'm against all racism. I don't like the white racist. I don't like the black racist. I don't like the Asian race. I don't like any of it.
First of all, everybody in that group who was protesting those folks weren't Black Lives Matters people.
Not everybody who was protesting in Charlottesville was a Ku Klux Klan member. Some of them are actually upset over the removal of these statues.
The vast majority were not.
You're right. I don't disagree with you.
The vast majority.
But we should also...
And that gathering was not about that statue. It was a gathering they called it Unite the Right, but that was a code word for Unite the White. And everybody knew that. And everybody understood that.
What Black Lives Matter means?
Well, the difference I would suggest to you is one of those groups is saying, don't hate me, and the other one is saying, I hate you. And there is a difference there.
What Black Panthers represent?
The Black Panthers weren't involved in this.
Well, frankly,
and I don't know what the Black Panthers represent.
What does Louis Farrakhan represent? Black supremacy. That's what he preaches. Tell me one time that the left has sufficiently condemned. He is as racist as any Ku Klux Klan member.
Okay.
Well, my point is, if you want to fix society...
I've heard him condemned by lots of people. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I did. His people were able to come to the White House under the previous administration and meet with them.
Okay.
What would happen if Trump had anybody? Well, matter of fact, right now, they've got Steve Bannon. Now, I personally think Steve Bannon ought to go, too. But they're demanding, he has apparently no real connection other than he ran Breitbart, which was too sympathetic to a lot of these crazies. But he himself, apparently, half his staff is Jewish or black on Breitbart, and yet we're demanding that he leave. Obama actually met with people from Louis Farrakhan's Nation of Islam, which is a black separatist nationalist group. He never fully condemned his pastor that he sat under, who made completely black supremacist arguments. Now, my point is, Franklin, I'm not saying one's good and one's bad. I'm saying they're both bad. And we ought to be, you all had a presidential candidate who said all lives matter and was forced to apologize for saying it.
As I said, John, there may be a time for that conversation.
But now's not it. Okay.
No, this weekend is not it.
Well, you want to know what that leads to? What you're doing, this is what I was complaining about. The media is doing that as well. What you're doing is you are giving ammunition to the crazies on the right.
Okay.
You are making the situation worse because what you're saying is we can't sit down and have a fact-based discussion of racism. We have to have an identity politics filtered discussion of racism, and that's the very problem from the start.
It's not the problem. The problem is there is no equivalency when people are marching in an American street with swastikas on their arm and making Sig Heil salutes. There is no equivalency in the United States for that.
So when the guys stood at the polling place in Maryland with the Black Panther insignias on, which was a communist movement, at least originally, and they threatened voters, that's not an equivalent.
Well, if that actually happened.
It did happen. There's video of it. Franklin, look it up. Okay. They pled guilty until the Obama administration removed the charges.
Okay, John.
They had actually already pled guilty.
Okay, John.
Why would the police stand and watch?
They had to stand down. That's another problem.
Why would the police stand and watch while they lassoed, stood on top of, put ropes around the monument, and pulled it down?
Because we can't have a fact-based discussion on this. We can't discuss how.
Why would the police do that?
Because they've been ordered to stand down.
Why would the police?
Look, they were ordered to stand down in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
They did two things. They stood by, but they actually, when they finally did break up the right-wing protesters, they funneled them into the left-wing protesters and then stood back and watched the fights. And then the mayor has the gall to try to blame President Trump for the violence.
Well, you know, I believe it was the mayor, I believe, said that they let the group do this, the violent group pull it down because they were letting both sides equally have their time.
In Charlottesville, both sides were carrying bats and clubs.
Yeah,
and one side was carrying significant firepower.
Actually, there was
Black
a
Lives
militia
Matter
group
side?
there, and guess what? Now, this is according to liberal reporters in the group. The only people breaking fights up were the very militia that Franklin's talking about. They were the only people breaking fights up.
The Black Lives Matter are the ones that did not have a permit, right?
The counter-protesters did not have a permit.
Was that Black Lives Matter?
Well, there were.
They
a lot
were
of groups.
one part of it.
There were a lot of groups.
There were about 8 different groups there, none of which were really affiliated with each other, who were there protesting this
Taking down
white
the mosque.
national.
by the
No,
way,
they weren't
keep in
protesting
mind,
that.
Keep in mind that
What
these
were they
protesters,
They were protesting those white nationalists.
and the white nationalists, keep in mind, they're not from Charlottesville. This is a very small.
That's called rent-a-mob, isn't
It's
it?
a small fringe group of crazies that
Rent-a-mob?
came from all over to Charlottesville.
Could it be rent-a-mob?
Well, look,
There's somebody that keeps trying to keep things stirred up.
well, you had counter protest in Seattle this weekend after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Franklin, the bad thing for you all is you can put this off all you want, but it eventually eats your own people. The chancellor of UC Berkeley is spending $9,000 to put an escape door in his office for when the liberal protesters take over the building.
Well, I have not been hesitant to say I disagree with what's going on college campuses.
It's
I've agreed with that.
It's
No,
identity politics,
It's
Franklin.
not identity
It
politics.
is.
I have said very clearly that everyone needs to have free speech on those campuses, didn't I?
Well, you're in the minority.
No, I'm
among
not.
the left.
I'm not in the minority, and I don't think that at all. In fact, I've heard tons of people making that argument
Well,
on both sides.
Franklin, do you know who Arkansas professor Kyle Quinn is?
I do not.
Well, he's a guy who happened to look like one of the guys in the crowd over there. He's now had to leave his home because Hollywood celebrities outed him from pictures on the internet. Now, he was 1,000 miles away with friends eating dinner.
And
he has now had to leave his house because of the threats.
And there's a lesson to be taken from that, and I hope those people are held
It's
accountable.
your side
are
doing
held
it.
accountable.
It's
for it.
your people
Yeah,
doing it.
yes.
And it's the same people that you're saying, oh, well, there's no real collection over here. There's no organization over here.
Oh, there is no organization on that. That's something that is the modern internet age that we've dealt with, and I think they have to be held accountable for what they did. Some people got outed, though, whose employers didn't know they were there at a white supremacist rally, but they were.
Well, frankly, do you think the Dylan Roof shooting was a racist act?
Clearly.
Did President Obama call it a racist act?
I don't recall the words he used.
He didn't.
I do seem to remember a lot of conservatives praising his speech about it, though.
We did, but
Okay.
we're fair about this. We praised President Trump's speech. Here's what he said. Until the investigation is complete, I'm necessarily constrained in terms of talking about the details of the case. He didn't mention or condemn white supremacy. Now, he did say there was obviously a racial element to it, but that's it. Now, I'm fine with that statement, but that's my point about having a fair and honest discussion of this, Franklin. I wasn't upset with him for doing it or not doing it. You all don't grant, the New York Times didn't jump all over him because his statement wasn't enough. It didn't, they have beaten the Trump presidency to death over this.
Charles Krauthammer said yesterday what President Trump did yesterday was a moral disgrace.
I heard that.
Yeah. I don't agree with Charles. He's never liked Trump. He's never said anything positive about Trump.
Well, okay.
All right, so the shooter in the Dallas, Texas, that killed the police, he was an avowed black nationalist, okay? Obama condemned the shootings but did not call out or even allude to his hateful views. And instead, he talked about, and matter of fact, Loretta Lynch, in her discussion of it, actually praised Black Lives Matter, which this guy came to support, and made no mention of his ideology or hate, but did manage to directly name multiple cases of police-involved shootings. So you have a black nationalist murder police officers in the street, and they don't mention it. They don't mention his ideology. My point is, Franklin, that ideology of hate is just as bad as the KKK and the white ideology of hate.
Well, as I pointed out a moment ago, John, there may be times to have that discussion. That weekend is not that time.
You're wrong. You're wrong. The truth is always in style.
Here's
the truth is always right.
Well, here's the truth. No matter what happened, John, I'm against white nationalists and neo-Nazis, and I'm with whoever was protesting against them every single time. And it's offensive
so the protesters
to me.
against them that had baseball bats in their hands, that's acceptable to you.
In a United States city, the President of the United States would have any hesitation whatsoever.
He didn't hesitate.
Yeah,
he condemned hate. He condemned racism. He didn't mention white supremacy.
What did he do wrong? Tell me what he did wrong.
Obama didn't mention white supremacy in the Dylan Ruth case. Did you get offended at him?
Well, that's because there wasn't an organized white supremacist
He
group
was
there.
we knew within hours that he was a white supremacist that did the shooting. And we know from what he said at the scene from witnesses that he was a white supremacist. Obama didn't condemn white supremacy. Why didn't you get offended at him?
Because he wasn't a white supremacist
You didn't get offended at him because he's part of your identity and you're willing to go down that road.
Because you don't understand the difference between a sick individual and a movement.
Dylan Roof was a sick individual.
And when a David Duke shows up and
talk about that.
When a David Duke shows up and starts saying,
the car driver has mental health issues, Franklin.
Because we are the people who put him in office.
And President Trump has explicitly repudiated David Duke a year ago. He explicitly repudiated him.
After he claimed he didn't know who he was.
And by the way, Franklin,
he probably did, even though
why
do you think he should know who he was?
A decade earlier he'd been on the radio talking about him.
Well, that doesn't mean Trump knew who he was. He was busy making money. He had other things to do besides fool around with somebody like David Duke.
Unless we can have honest discussions about this on all sides, you're never going to fix it. Well, as long as you vilify one side over the other and you don't actually look at facts, you're never going to fix it.
We've got to take a break, and I'll be back, but I want to continue the conversation about what we do with these Confederate historical pieces going forward. We'll be back.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
And you're listening to WOOPLP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Another SOS, and you're stressing, and that's the time to check in. Check into cash, check in. When you have a cash emergency, you check in. We understand the urgency. Check in to get your loans and more. You gotta check in with your check into cash store. Walk in, call in, click in, go all in. Check into cash in, check into cash. Your one-stop money shop. Check into cash.
Tired of carrying around cash in your pocket and tired of banks? Visit usmoneycard.com and get your prepaid debit card to use wherever MasterCard is accepted. It's a smart and safe alternative to carrying cash, and it's convenient. Even if you have a bill that requires a check, US Money Card has that too. Visit usmoneycard.com today and find out how to get your reloadable prepaid debit card. Log on, load up, and love your US Money Card. Visit usmoneycard.com for complete details.
No dealers allowed.
Jackson Catnapper, family owned and operated in Cleveland since 1933, offering the best with over 70 styles of recliners, sofas, electronic lift chairs, full living room packages. Call Mike now at 961-7239 because Jackson Catnapper now offers sales to the public
every Saturday. That's right, every Saturday.
From 8 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon. Or call Mike at 961-7239. Or go see him
every Saturday
at 1911 King Edward Avenue, just across from the main plant. Jackson Catnapper, family owned and operated in Cleveland since 1933. 961-7239.
No dealers allowed.
Hello, my name is Andy Figglestaller with Ed Jacobs & Associates. We are an employee benefit and insurance broker in business for the past 20 years. The new healthcare law, also known as Obamacare, has finally arrived. The law is complex and the choices are confusing. You have questions, we have the answers. It is our passion to find cost-effective solutions for every client. The solutions will be different for every person or business. Let our knowledge, experience, and passion go to work for you. Contact us today and let us assist you through this process. Our phone number is 4 423-473-0202, or you can find us on the web at edjacobs.com.
Financial Recovery, licensed and bonded collection agency, located right here in Cleveland, Tennessee. Give them a call at 423-473-7670. Small town service with big city results. A full service medical, commercial, retail, and individual collection service. Celebrating 10 years in business. Call Financial Recovery at 423-473-7670 to help you with your accounts receivable and past due invoices. Financial Recovery, 423-473-7670.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop in your cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it. Dig it, dig it.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson on Whoop FM. Call 423-614-5553 to join in on the conversation. Now, back to Backfire.
And we're back. All right, now that I want to finish up this conversation because I'm tired of talking about it. I think it's a bad situation to even be talking about, but these Confederate historical monuments and some of the things that everybody's wanting to get rid of now, I think personally there's a lot of history there. You know, Robert E. Lee, they're getting ready to take one down in New York, a Robert E. Lee statue, I think. You know, this was
birthday to you.
Woo!
Special announcement.
Somebody's brought me a cake, it looks like, ladies and gentlemen.
67 years old. Steve's going to love the cake, says Toby
Love
Pendergrass.
the cake. Oh, boy, here we go.
Here she is.
McCaysville Drug and Gun.
Let's get that up.
I saw a guy wearing a T-shirt yesterday from McCaysville, Georgia, and it had McCaysville Drug and Gun store. And I thought, he asked me what I want for my birthday. I said, I'd like to have one of those T-shirts.
I've never seen that combination before.
We might ought to get John and Franklin of McCaysville Drug and Gun.
Now, see, I'll be fine with that.
That would be too.
Franklin.
Well, I would wear that shirt, but
because
because most people would believe that it was some kind of joke.
Okay.
And it might not be. Apparently isn't.
Thank you, Mr. Toby Pendergrass.
Well, Steve, first off, the problem is it's not Confederate monuments. It's politically incorrect monuments. And, for example, in New York City, there's Columbus Square. Yeah. Columbus, you know, according to the left narrative, was a horrible, evil man who destroyed, you know, the Native Americans. So you got to get rid of that. Here's, I think, a good analogy. Governor Pataki, Republican from New York, decided that they wanted to remove the PCBs that General Electric factories in upscale New York for years had dumped in the river that had settled in the bottom of the river. So he got a grant and he dredged up and removed it. After he vacuumed the river bottom, PCB levels shot up and the Hudson's clean waters were polluted again because he wouldn't let it lie.
Right.
That's what we're dealing with right here, because where do you stop this stuff? Washington was a slave owner. Should we demolish the Washington Memorial? And before Franklin says that's ridiculous, serious people on the left have actually already been writing about how it's time to remove the Jefferson Memorial off the tidal basin.
Well, they want to, I mean, from what I understand, there's some people that want to just eliminate all the history about how America was even formed.
I'm letting John finish first, then I'll talk.
Well, 41 of 46 signers of the Declaration of Independence owned slaves. So you start by tearing down these statues and burning books, and then you eventually begin attacking people. That's where this leads.
All right, Franklin, you're on.
All right. First of all, let me say what my position is, and then I'll go a little further into it. My position is the memorials should not come down, but they definitely ought to have actual history attached to them, which is what doesn't happen typically.
I'm okay with that.
All right.
Okay.
Most of these memorials have no historical context added to them. They're just sitting there.
And some of them were actually erected in a different time in order to provoke
That's exactly
minority
right.
communities.
So
and that's
many
a
of these.
different
So, for example, the Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville that some people were protesting up there about was put there in 1924. It wasn't really put there so much as commemorating what happened in the Civil War as thumbing our nose in some cases at Jim Crow laws and things like that were being put forward there. That's a historical context. So what I advocate is if you're going to have those in those public squares, there needs to be significant signage there that sets forth the whole story.
Here's the thing. I wouldn't disagree with that because Condoleezza Rice made the point that you can't obliterate your history because you don't learn anything from it. You put a plaque there that says, here's when this was put up, here's what was going on when it was put up, and people learn from it.
Now, let me give you a example that I did see over the weekend that brought the issue home for some people. Okay? I mean, at one point, there were several Adolf Hitler statues in Germany. A lot of people wanted those down. Yeah. A lot of those were taken down. Are you saying it was wrong for them to want those down? I don't know. But a lot of them also then, instead of that, got moved to museums, and there they have context for them, and there's a discussion about what was behind them.
But let me give a little context to that, though. You've got 2 Japanese tourists right now that have been arrested for posing for a picture in front of the German government building doing a Sieg Heil salute, and the punishment is 3 years in prison. So the problem with this is we believe in free speech, even free speech that offends other people. Well, you have to temper all of this.
In this case, though, we're talking about speech by the government most of the time, which is different. This is these monuments are the government speech.
Well, not necessarily. For example, at Vanderbilt, the Daughters of the American or UDC, United Daughters of the Confederacy, built a dormitory over there, and they named it the way they wanted to name it. Now, personally, I think that Vanderbilt, when they forced them to change that name, should have had to given the money back because they gave that money in good faith, and at the time. The UDC was not a racist organization. It was an organization of widows of former people that fought in the Confederacy.
Is Robert E. Lee something that we need to keep from people?
I don't think we need to keep him from it, but I think you could have a reasonable discussion about Robert E. Lee's real life.
Well, he was in charge. He was in charge of the defense of the slavery.
He was opposed to slavery personally. He spoke against it. Huh?
He owned slaves.
So did Ulysses S. Grant.
So did
Grant. That ought to be part of the discussion.
But that's our point,
No, here's my point. My point is simply this. What really galls me is people saying this is all about history and heritage, and they really don't want to have a discussion about history and heritage.
Some of those people are sincere, and some of them aren't, frankly.
But I mean, it's like, and I use this example all the time. You talk about, the Confederate battle flag on state flags. Okay.
Yeah.
Well. In many cases, there's no history attached to that. The stars and bars, which really is a different thing, but the Mississippi flag, for example, that flag never flew in Mississippi during the Civil War, ever.
Yeah.
It was added in the 1920s and 30s. All right?
I think some of these things could be cleaned up.
So if you want to have that discussion, and somebody says, well, it's my history and my heritage, I say, you need to learn something about your history and heritage.
I think what you said is completely reasonable. The problem is there's not a lot of reasonable ideas on the left going on right now. For example, over the weekend, the Lincoln Memorial was vandalized over the weekend.
Yeah.
They spray painted the Lincoln Memorial. By the way, the sculptor that sculpted that statue wouldn't allow blacks into his studio. The sculptor was a racist. So I guess by this thought process that we're going down the identity politics vein, you say, well, I guess we should remove the Lincoln Memorial.
That's my point, though. Let's put all the information out there.
Okay.
Not just,
should we change the name of roads that have Robert E. Lee name on it and there's highways. There's
you want to know a really interesting one, and Franklin, you can explain this to me. And my point in talking earlier about the riots in Charlottesville was the culture of the media and what they choose to elevate and what they choose to depress.
Right.
And I think they ought to be much more even about how they do this. It ought to be based on, if you're a hateful, evil person, if you're a hateful, evil ideology, it ought to get equal treatment, and it doesn't. But for example, Robert Byrd, the recently deceased longest-serving U.S. Senator Democrat, was a recruiter for the Ku Klux Klan. His name is on 50 government buildings in this country.
Sure.
50 buildings. Show me a single liberal, left-wing commentator, protester who has demanded that Robert Byrd's name be removed from any one of those 50 buildings.
Sure. And I don't have any problem with having a discussion that talks about all that history. That absolutely happened, what John said. But if you're going to be complete about it, it would also be that he reputed it, apologized for it.
So did Strom Thurmond, and they raked him over the coals.
Let him finish. Go ahead.
Said it was the most shameful time of his life, and he spent most of his life trying to make up for that, and ultimately, later in his life, actually received a commendation from the NAACP for his efforts in that.
Of course he did,
the
because
total context,
but frankly,
and you ought to say all of that.
You want all the go the full context there. Tell me a single, for example, Tim Scott, black Republican senator from South Carolina. Tell me when the NAACP gave him an award.
I don't know the answer.
They haven't, because he's a Republican. So the NAACP, that's my point, Franklin. They excoriated Strom Thurmond. They ran Trent Lott out of office because he simply tried to compliment a 100-year-old man for having a good life, and yet they let Robert Byrd go, well, I'm sorry, and they go, well, that's good enough for us. That's the problem.
Well, I would say this, John. Very few people on the right that I have seen have taken the position that I've been espousing here. The problem isn't the criticism of the monument or the person. It's the lack of historical context. And
Actually, Condoleezza Rice made that argument over the weekend.
Okay. Well,
she's
for
a
her.
pretty high-ranking Republican.
Yes, and she's also an academic with a strong interest in history. Well, I get that. I commend her for that. But I'm saying that needs to be the approach that needs to be taken.
Well, I
think all towns, cities, and states, somebody needs to make decisions about these monuments and some of these type things themselves. It seems to be most of the problems we're having with monuments right now are coming from Democratic-run cities.
Well, now keep in mind, they're coming from Democrat-run cities who have high minority communities. That's right. And again, identity politics, you get Democrat mayors and Democrat governors, and they're pandering to the identity politics of their voters.
Okay.
By the way, Franklin, on CNN panels this weekend, you had black conservative Republicans who made the argument you're talking about, and they were immediately called Uncle Toms and traitors to their race by the liberal Democrats. So maybe you need to get your house in order so we can have these conversations.
We got to move on.
It's a pretty strange dynamic when I'm sitting in here and the people I'm quoting who are espousing the position that I'm taking are Paul Ryan and people like that.
Well,
and Tim Scott, by the way, who you mentioned.
They have to take this position because the media is so unfair in their coverage of these things.
Do you think the media is fair or unfair right now about everything they've reported?
Everything they report? Well, I would have never said that at any point in American history, that they're always fair.
Well, all right. Do you think they're being fair with the coverage they're doing about Donald Trump?
I think they've been fair about this weekend's coverage. I do. Because, hold on. There's no question in my mind that the President of the United States has to take a very strong moral position. He did not. He backed off of the statement that he made yesterday.
I thought he did.
He backed off of it yesterday.
I really thought he did a great statement as President Obama made after the shooting at Dillon Root. The difference is he then got hammered for not specifically calling out white nationalists or white racists and white supremacists, which Obama didn't call out either. So our point is the press was not fair with him. They held him to a different standard. Now, you can say his past statements, inflammatory statements, are why they held him to a different standard, but it was a different standard. But let me give you a perfect example. There's a New York Times reporter who was at Charlottesville reporting on it. She tweeted out, this is her words, a few wrap-up thoughts from Charlottesville. 1, striking how many of the white nationalists were young people, almost entirely men. 2, the hard left seemed as hate-filled as the alt-right. I saw club-wielding Antifa beating white nationalists being led out of the park. 3, among my unanswered questions, police response. Why did things get so out of hand so quickly? Could violence have been prevented? Now, personally, those seem like reasonable comments. This is a New York Times reporter. She immediately got attacked on Twitter for her they said she was normalizing Nazis and drawing false equivalents. Don't buy into the false equivalency like Trump and sympathizers. Only one group would commit genocide against the other if given powers. Here's her response now once she was beaten. Yes, fair enough. See my correction. Rethinking this, should have said violent, not hate-filled. They were standing up to hate. She immediately retracted what she said and apologized. Franklin, that's the liberals who won't allow a fair and even conversation. And you're never going to fix this problem without open dialogue.
I'll tell you, I'm starting to feel sorry for
Now, she's
President
New York
Trump.
Times, Franklin. Explain that. She felt compelled to apologize for her clearly open observational comments.
Are you tired of the criticism to our president?
I think he brings most of it on himself with his lack of discipline.
Oh, you think he caused the problem this weekend?
I think that
he caused the problem. He did something wrong this weekend?
Yeah, he did.
What did he do? Tell me what he did.
He followed the Obama comment.
Oh, I mean, really and truly. He said some things right after it happened, and I thought what he said was good. I mean, I didn't see anything wrong with anything he said.
I saw multiple presidential statements this weekend that were played back. Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, other people like that. And they had no hesitance whatsoever in condemning those people in particular.
Well, let me ask you a question, Franklin.
And that's where the conversation had to start.
All right, but let me ask you a question.
He could have said...
Was there anything wrong with what he did say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was wrong?
So you didn't like what he did say?
His statement pretty much clearly set forth his view that what happened in Charlotte was everybody's fault and didn't.
So you don't think the Antifa people who came with baseball bats in their hands bear any responsibility for the violence?
I didn't say any such thing.
Well, that's what he was saying, Franklin.
Well, that's where he was wrong to start there.
Is that not a fact?
It may have been a fact.
Franklin's right. I said this a week or two ago.
But what he
we are a post-factual nation.
What he did was make it absolutely clear.
I thought it was very clear that nobody was supposed to do this.
Fascism are just as bad as people
promoting it.
No, he said
people who were violent were wrong.
He said
the
both sides
was
were
wrong.
Both sides were wrong. All sides
we
were wrong.
We are a post-factual nation, and apparently Franklin's okay with that. We can't actually have a factual discussion because it might offend, your fact might offend somebody.
Well,
by the way, new documents came out in the Trump-Russia thing. They had multiple contacts about meetings with Russia to which they turned down and said, we don't want to do it. Please make this guy go away.
I'm going to change the subject.
Let's just stay on this for a moment.
All right.
I mean, it's pretty clear over the weekend that Donald Trump doesn't have any problem whatsoever lashing out and clearly criticizing people he thinks disagrees with him. I mean, he did that right away.
Tell me what you mean.
I mean, when the CEO, the black CEO, resigned from him, he immediately, within 30 minutes, tweeted out an angry statement at him. Okay? It was easy for him to do that. He hadn't had any trouble immediately, angrily tweeting about, the Attorney General or James Comey or what Jeff Sessions should do, all of those things. So
he likes to say what's on his mind.
Franklin,
Is there anything wrong
let
with
me
that?
directly quote him, and you tell me what's wrong with it. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate
and
groups
then yesterday, what did he do?
that are
He backed off
repugnant
on
to
it.
everything we hold
How did
dear
he
as
back
Americans. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America.
I think Donald Trump's right. He
He's
can't
trying
say
to have-
anything that makes the
He's
left wing
trying to
happy.
have just like I said, but Franklin has been consistent today. I started out by saying we need to be able to have a fact-based, equal discussion, and he said now's not the time.
No,
That's his point. Now's not you don't have a right to your facts or your truth because it has to be subjected now to other people's emotions. That's what he's saying.
All right, let's change the subject a minute.
By the way, Ted Cruz strongly condemned it, exactly like Franklin says he wants. And what happened to him? A New York Times reporter mocked him and said that he was just shilling for the next election. Explain that one, Franklin.
I'm sorry, what now?
Ted Cruz unequivocally attacked the white nationalist, racist people. It was a strong statement. Matter of fact, a lot of people said it was the statement President Trump should have made. And what did he get for it? A New York Times reporter said, sorry to be cynical, but most... Well, hang on. But most of all, Rubio and Ted Cruz, to me, seem mostly to be doing a tremendous job of posturing for 2020. That was what they got from the media for their strong condemnation. By the way, Rubio...
Let me give you another statement.
All right, go ahead.
I'll read it to you. You tell me who said this. Those of us in public life can only resent the use of our names by those who seek political recognition for the repugnant doctrines of hate they espouse. The politics of racial hatred and religious bigotry practiced by the Klan and others have no place in this country and are destructive of the values for which America has always stood. Who said that?
Probably Reagan.
Reagan in 1984 when the KKK said, we're going to support Reagan in the election. All right? These people are out there making statements saying they were backers of Trump. He was going...
Wait a minute. Who said it? They said it. He didn't say it.
That's right.
Trump
In
didn't
this
say
case, the Klan said it, and Reagan said,
Franklin,
no, I don't want your support.
Louis Farrakhan supported Obama, made public statements that he supported Obama. Tell me when Obama condemned Louis Farrakhan in the Nation of Islam. He didn't.
Well, I'll look
and by the way, let me read Cruz's.
I am just
Cruz
telling
gave
you,
one of the best Twitter responses.
Let me just look. I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. These are people in Nazi uniforms protesting in American
They were
City.
wrong.
And he condemned them.
We hate that.
He didn't do enough.
Let me tell you something. I hate those people just as much as I do the people that are protesting under the black flag, that are fry the bacon, kill the police, whatever they're chanting. My goodness,
But
is that not sick?
these people were protesting against white nationalists.
So what? They shouldn't be protesting anything.
They shouldn't protest against neo-Nazis?
They should have never had a permit to do what they were doing down there, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, they did have a permit.
Actually, the counter-protesters didn't.
That's what I'm saying.
The counter-protesters didn't have a permit, so they were actually there illegally.
Illegally, and they brought weapons with them.
But frankly, let me read. Cruz gave one of the best Twitter responses to this guy you've ever heard. He said, gosh, you're right, because Nazis in the Klan have such love for Cuban Americans. If only we worked for a paper that shilled for Stalin. Look up, folks, look up New York Times and Walter Duranty, and you'll find out that he won a Pulitzer Prize, which they have never given back, for covering for the forced starvation of millions of people in the Ukraine. That's the New York Times fairness for you.
I want to say something, and we're about at the end of the show, and I just got to say this. I think the people spoke at the last election. We elected a president to clean up Washington. There's a lot of problems with Washington, both sides, Republican and Democratic. I think politics have gotten totally out of hand. I think both sides have a lot of problems. I think President Trump is trying to do the right thing, but he needs some support from some of these people that are pushing all the buttons to get rid of it.
By the way, Franklin,
I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats are trying to get rid of it because they don't want their little nest disturbed in Washington.
And by the way, Franklin, the mother of the woman who was killed thanked President Trump for his comments.
Okay.
Well, I wouldn't think there's any more interested individual than the mother
She also praised her daughter for going and protesting.
Yes, she did, and I do too.
Okay.
I'm not opposed to them protest. I am opposed to them bringing baseball bats.
I want to ask this question. Is it time for Mitch McConnell to retire?
No.
Why not?
Look,
what's he getting done?
His wife works in the administration,
So
one
what?
of Donald Trump's appointees.
I don't care. Is it time to get something done in Washington?
Yes, it's time to get
then
something
let's
done.
get something done. We can't sit back here and talk about, well,
the president,
we don't understand the politics and how
well, the
they
president
work
could
in
have
Washington.
the president
It
could have
takes
easily
10
done
years for us to get something done in Washington.
The president could have easily done this.
What?
It really isn't that complicated.
Do what?
There's a whole bunch of moderate Republicans that would have worked with Democrats to fix Obamacare. And at the same time, the president could have linked his support for that effort to tax reform. Could have easily done that.
Why didn't the Democrats
do
come
it.
across the line?
They would have.
Oh, no,
you want to read McConnell's statement saying we're not even going to
So
talk
in
to
other
them?
words, you don't believe in President Obama's comment that elections have consequences. We should even though we're in the majority, we should cave in to the liberal side
I didn't say
opinion.
anything at all. What I said is you could have gotten
You
the
said
tax
we had
reform.
to compromise.
I said you could have gotten the tax reform deal you wanted if
No,
you got
we couldn't get the tax reform deal we wanted. We could get the tax reform deal that the losers of the last election would let us have.
All right,
That's not democracy.
We're running late. We're running late, and there's a lot of things we can talk about.
Next week we're going to talk about, please look up abortion in Iceland and Down syndrome. Look up that, folks.
All right. I want to say one thing before we leave. What is the major highway through Cleveland, Tennessee?
Interstate 75?
No, well, old highway.
Highway 64 and Highway 11.
All right, Highway 11. What is Highway 11 referred to in Cleveland?
Lee.
South Lee and North Lee Highway. Robert E. Lee.
Was it named after that? I don't know
Robert
that.
E. Lee. I've been told that it was.
I don't know that.
I've been told that it was. So there's something for you to think about and study about, and we'll talk about it next week. Robert E. Lee Highway. Do we
call your councilman and tell him not to raise your city taxes.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson, John Stanberry, and Franklin Chansey. Catch them again on Whoop FM at noon today and every Wednesday morning from 7:30 to 8:30. Now, back to more music on Whoop FM.